Welcome the chosen ones. Sometimes the villain keeps your newborn photographs in their wallet. Welcome to a narrative that doesn't start with once upon a time, but with once they possessed everything about you, your thoughts, your voice, even your quiet. They named you the chosen one. Doesn't it sound majestic? But let's be honest, you weren't selected like royalty. You were plucked like a ripe fruit to be peeled, juiced, and given to everyone but you. And when the truth came out, when Mother lost the case, it wasn't just a legal defeat. It was a demolition of the house of cards she built using your life as collateral. Now they're terrified not of the verdict, but of the receipts, the guilt-stained trophies, the DMs, the diaries, and that one family friend who saw too much. Because if the world ever finds out what they really did to shape, steal, and sell your life story, it won't just ruin reputations, but it'll shatter illusions that were years in the making. This isn't just tea. This is ancestral soup, simmered in secrets and seasoned with guilt. So buckle up, because today we're peeling back the pretty filter and diving into the raw radioactive truth. How the so-called chosen one was really just the controlled one. How love was leveraged like a payday loan. And why the people who built your cage are now panicking because you finally found the key. Let's talk about it. Number 1. The chosen one was chosen to be controlled, not empowered. They didn't choose you because you were special, but because you were pliable, moldable, and easy to shape. Being the chosen one wasn't a blessing, it was a branding. You were their little project, their walking legacy. Their performance piece behind every "we believe in you" was a hidden script written in fine print. As long as you follow our plan, they didn't pick you to rise. They picked you to obey, to mirror their wounds, to fix what they couldn't. To live the life they missed. The deadline for your spotlight was never yours. It was a projection of their unresolved dreams. You were praised for being bright, but punished the moment you stopped shining in the direction they pointed and started thinking for yourself. Suddenly, the chosen one became the problem one. It wasn't empowerment. It was quiet possession, emotional colonization. They weren't raising a child. They were customizing a product. Every decision was pre-approved, and every opinion was gently, then aggressively corrected. The leash was long enough to make you believe you were free, but tight enough to choke you the moment you strayed from the path they paved in expectations and silent threats. Here's the twisted irony. The praise they gave you. It was currency. Payment for your compliance. Compliments came with strings. Affection was a reward for performance. You weren't loved, you were graded. The chosen one label was just gift wrapped for control, and God help you if you ever tried to return the gift. You weren't chosen because they saw your power. You were chosen because they saw how to redirect it. Your potential made them nervous, so they domesticated it, dressed it up in goals, picked milestones, and mapped it out. When you finally broke free, they didn't mourn the loss of you. They mourned the loss of their puppet. You were never chosen. You were claimed, and now you're reclaiming. Number 2. Their manipulation wasn't emotional. It was economic warfare. This wasn't some emotional slip-up or messy parenting. It was calculated, cold-blooded economic warfare disguised as bedtime stories and fake concern. They didn't just raise you. They leveraged you. You were an asset, a walking investment portfolio. Your emotions were just a side effect. Their true focus was on the return. Do you think they pushed you into certain schools, careers, or friendships because they cared? No, it was all strategic positioning. Every move was about control over your output. The grades, the image, the behavior, everything had to look good on their scoreboard. And if you started glitching, if your mental health cracked under the pressure, that wasn't seen as pain, but as a bad investment. They weren't parenting, they were asset managing. And your milestones, those were just dividends. Graduation grade. They bragged about the family job promotion. Perfect. They recycled the story at dinner parties, but when you broke down in private or questioned the setup, suddenly you were ungrateful and too sensitive. Because broken products don't boost ego or resale value. Your dreams optional, their expectations non-negotiable. You were allowed to choose as long as you picked from the menu they approved. And behind all the "we're so proud of you" moments, a business model. They didn't nurture you to be happy. They programmed you to be useful emotionally, financially, and socially. A little gold medal with legs. And if you ever tried to opt out, decline the role, there came the guilt, the manipulation, the cries of, "After all we did for you." Yeah, they did a lot, but most of it came with strings, invoices, and interest rates. The love was conditional, and the bill always came later. So no, it wasn't emotional parenting gone wrong. It was emotional capitalism in full swing. You weren't raised with love, you were raised like livestock, and now that you've broken the fence, they're panicking. Not because they lost you, but because they lost the profit margin they built in your name. Number 3, love was a transaction, not a bond. Love wasn't love, it was a loyalty program. You didn't get affection, you earned points. Smile on command. 10 points. Say what they want to hear. Ditch your boundaries to keep the peace. Jackpot. But the moment you cashed in on your own identity, those points vanished, as did their warmth. They said it was unconditional. What they meant was conditionally unconditional. As long as you stayed predictable, manageable, and useful, you weren't nurtured, you were monitored. Your value rose and fell based on how well you played your part. Affection came in waves, but only when you stayed in line. The moment you stepped out of character, the love went on lunch break. They weaponized your wanna-be liked. You were starving just enough to come racing back the moment they delivered a crumb of acceptance. The worst part? They made you feel like a thief, as if you were taking affection that you never had in the first place. They set the emotional thermostat too low, which is your fault for being aloof. Too warm, you're being clingy. Just when you thought you figured it out, they moved the goalposts. You weren't loved. You were trained like a dog who kept hoping for a treat, but got scolded for barking. God forbid you called it out. Suddenly you were too dramatic, too sensitive, too ungrateful. That's the trick. They gaslight you into thinking love is supposed to feel like pressure, performance, or punishment. So you keep showing up to auditions, begging for a role in a script you didn't write. They called it sacrifice, but what they sacrificed was your stability, your truth, your sense of worth. In exchange, they gave you the illusion of being chosen, special, and cherished until you grew wise to the contract, hidden under the compliments. This wasn't love, it was emotional blackmail dressed in a family photo. And now that you've stopped performing, now that you've unplugged from the act, they're not angry because you changed. They're angry because the illusion can't survive without your cooperation. Number 4, the courtroom wasn't about justice. It was an autopsy of a manufactured narrative. The courtroom wasn't about truth versus lies. It was about lies that showed up bruised. This wasn't justice. It was an autopsy of a storyline they handcrafted for years, and they never expected it to be put under a microscope. But once it was the clean little tale they told of sacrifice, parenting, and we did our best, it split open like spoiled fruit. The court didn't just say you were wrong. It said this entire performance was staged. Every carefully curated anecdote, every doctored memory, every time they cried on cue to win sympathy, it got dismantled piece by piece. The good parent image didn't just crumble, it was dissected. And with every lie that got exposed, they weren't just losing credibility, they were losing the script. They lived by the documents, told one story, the emails, another, the testimonies. Those were landmines. They didn't anticipate how many people remembered the cracks in their act. And when the judge or jury saw the pattern, it didn't feel like a custody case anymore. It felt like a cold case finally reopened. And let's be honest, what scared them wasn't the legal loss. It was that the curtain was yanked back on all the behind-the-scenes puppeteering. Things they'd whispered in private and made you doubt yourself about were now confirmed in front of strangers who owed them nothing. They didn't lose a case, but they did lose control and narrative ownership. You weren't their character anymore. You were a witness, a survivor, a truth bomb they couldn't defuse in time. The worst part? The court didn't just side with you, it believed you. It listened. It saw through the fake tears, the guilt trips dressed up as concern. They weren't terrified of the law, they were terrified of exposure. Because for people who live by lies, the scariest thing isn't punishment, but proof. Number 5, they used family as a human shield. Family was their force field, their all-access pass, their get-out-of-accountability-free card. Every time things got uncomfortable, they threw the word like a smoke bomb, but we're family, as if blood was bleached strong enough to scrub the damage clean, but it wasn't, and it never was. They used family the way corporations use fine print to protect themselves, not you. Every boundary you tried to set, guilt tripped, every attempt at truth gas. Because the moment you questioned their behavior, suddenly you were tearing the family apart as if their abuse wasn't the wrecking ball they just didn't want you pointing out. The rubble society plays along to say someone's toxic, manipulative, and controlling. People not say it's your mother, uncle, or cousin. Suddenly they clutch pearls, but that's your family. Like DNA is some magical moral sanitizer. Like being related implies you should drink poison with a grin. They knew precisely what they were doing. The title of mom, dad, grandma, or big sis provided emotional cover. They knew you wouldn't dare to speak out, because who wants to be the one blaming their own blood? They counted on your quiet. For a time, it succeeded. You swallowed hurt in the name of harmony. You bit your tongue while they used family gatherings to rewrite history. But when the truth hit daylight, that shield cracked. Because the truth doesn't care what last name you share. It doesn't care about Sunday dinners or matching pajamas. It cares about patterns, repetition, and manipulation. And when people saw the pattern, the label of family didn't soften the blow. It made it uglier. They weren't acting out of love, they were acting undercover. And when that cover was blown, so was their immunity. No more hiding behind the family badge like it makes abuse noble. Family was never supposed to mean don't speak. It was supposed to mean don't hurt. And they failed that part completely. It was strategically enforced. Your silence wasn't growth, maturity, or taking the high road. It was survival disguised as mindfulness. You were taught to choke on your truth because every time you tried to speak it, they made you feel like the villain in your own story. Not because you were wrong, but because your truth inconvenienced their image. They didn't need to physically silence you. They just rewired your inner voice. Guilt became your internal gatekeeper, and you second-guessed every feeling, sentence, and boundary before it even had a chance to leave your lips. Not because it wasn't valid, but because you were trained to fear what your honesty might cost them. They convinced you that talking would ruin the family, that expressing pain was disrespectful, that telling your side was betrayal. They built a system where your silence made you look composed, and your truth made them look exposed. In their world, image was everything. Reputation over reality always. So you edited your story, bit your tongue raw, laughed off trauma like it was just a quirky childhood memory. You wore composure like armor while your insides screamed. And the worst part? You began to believe the lie that staying silent made you stronger. Forgiveness meant forgetting that being the bigger person meant being the buried person. But silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just trauma in a straitjacket. Sometimes it's a loyalty oath you never signed, but keep getting punished for breaking. And the second you decide to speak to say, actually, that did hurt me, they panic not because you're lying, but because you're finally telling the truth out loud. You weren't quiet because you were healed. You were quiet because they made sure you feared what honesty would cost. But now that muscles are cracking, and the silence they once called peace is starting to sound a lot more like complicity. They didn't just manipulate you, they made you thank them for it. That was the real trick. They took their control, dressed it up in care, and handed it to you with a smile, as if it were a gift. Because you were too young to tell the difference, you clutched it like it was love, as if it was something you were lucky to have. You were taught to say thank you with tears in your eyes. Thank you for the pressure. Thank you for the emotional blackmail. Thank you for the opportunities that came with strings tied so tightly that they nearly cut off your sense of self. Every time you questioned it, they hit you with the trump card. We sacrificed for you as if that control was some noble act of service. As if they didn't get anything out of keeping you dependent, quiet, and moldable. They called it guidance, but it was grooming. You weren't being helped. You were being conditioned to ignore your gut, second-guess your needs, and smile through discomfort as long as it made them proud. They wanted you polished, not powerful. Shiny on the outside, small on the inside. And they were strategic. Every time you cracked under the weight, they reminded you of how much worse it could have been. They didn't just abuse you. They installed gratitude for the abuse. They made you believe that being treated like a project with a purpose was better than not being noticed at all. That's why it's so confusing now. That's why healing feels like betrayal. Because they made their exploitation look like effort. They weaponized the fact that they did things for you to keep you from ever questioning why they did them or how much it cost you to accept their version of love. You were groomed to believe your suffering was a stepping stone, but it was really just a leash, a shiny, well-decorated leash. And now that you're removing it, they're panicking. Not because they lost a child, but because they lost control of their favorite puppet. Number 8. Their worst fear was not exposure, but your awakening. Their worst fear was not the world catching on, but you catching on. Because when the truth lives only in whispers behind closed doors, they still have control. They can rewrite history, gaslight, memories, and spin their version of the story like a vinyl stuck on repeat. But when you wake up, when you see the puppet strings and cut them one by one, that's when the whole act falls apart. They built their empire on your confusion, doubts, and loyalty to the narrative. They fed you. They thrived on your silence because it meant the show could go on uninterrupted. But the moment you pull back the curtain, the lights get harsh, and their polished facade reveals every crack and stain. What frightens them isn't the gossip or the courtroom drama. It's the moment you stop playing the role they wrote and start writing your own. That's when the power shifts. Because control isn't about holding facts or secrets, it's about holding you. When you awaken, you stop fearing them and needing their approval. You reclaim your voice, your choices, and your story, and that is the ultimate rebellion. It's not just about being heard. It's about being unbreakable. They can try to silence you, shame you, and gaslight you, but none of it sticks when you see through the smoke. Their power is a house of cards, and your awakening is the gust of truth that topples it. So, yeah, let the world know, but more importantly, let yourself know, because their real nightmare isn't exposure, it's your freedom. Number 9, you became the villain. The moment you chose yourself, the moment you drew a line, that's when the story flipped. Suddenly, you weren't the golden child anymore. You were the problem, the difficult one, the villain in their carefully spun narrative. Because choosing yourself in a world built to control you isn't just a personal revolution. It's a threat to the entire system they depended on. They branded your courage as cruel to your boundaries as rebellion. Every no you said became a scar on their fragile ego. Every step toward independence, a crack in their constructed empire. They rewrote your identity overnight, from beloved to betrayer, from their child to the one who dared to disagree. Freedom was their biggest fear because it meant losing the grip, the narrative, the power. So they weaponized labels crazy, selfish, ungrateful, like blunt instruments to silence your voice and shame your choices. They hoped that by making you the villain, they could rewrite the ending and keep the audience on their side. But here's the truth. The villain they painted you as only exists in their story. In actuality, you were the hero who recognized the shackles and shattered them, refusing to remain a footnote in their script of control. Your rebellion did more than simply break their mythology. It revealed it for what purpose? It was a jail disguised as love, a cage with a familiar face. So, yeah, you were the villain, but villains do not break free. They stay locked in roles you chose yourself, and that choice, as terrifying as it was to them, was the most radical, beautiful act of defiance possible, because real love isn't ownership. It's freedom, and you claimed yours. Number 10, they didn't lose custody of you. They lost ownership. The courtroom drama was just the curtain rising on a deeper, darker truth. They never truly saw you as a person. To them, you were property, an asset, something to be edited, molded, and branded with their fingerprints. Losing custody was not losing a child. It was losing their patent on your identity. For years, they controlled the narrative like editors with a red pen, rewriting your story to fit their image, trimming out parts that made them uncomfortable and adding flourishes to highlight their sacrifices. Your sentiments, footnotes, and wishes margins. They neglected you, didn't they? You were theirs, but once the court's verdict came down, that ownership slipped through their fingers like sand. You became unscripted, unpredictable, a wild card they can't rewrite or recall. That's what terrifies them the most. Because control isn't just about keeping you close. It's about controlling the story you tell yourself and the world. Now that you own your voice, your story, and your identity, they've lost the ultimate leverage. You're not just free, you're a threat, a living, breathing declaration that their authority was never absolute. They can't erase your chapters or mute your voice anymore. You're no longer the product they manufactured. You're a person who took back the pen. That loss is the true verdict. Not the custody papers, but the collapse of their claim to your soul. They didn't lose custody, they lost ownership, and that loss will haunt them far longer than any court ruling ever could. Their generational trauma became a blueprint, not a warning. Rather than breaking the cycle, they copied it layer by layer, as if trauma came with instructions that they blindly followed. It wasn't about healing wounds. It was about passing down the infection disguised as tradition or how things are done. You weren't a chance for healing. You were the rewrite button, a fresh draft where they could fix their past by controlling your present. They didn't want to see the scars. They wanted to erase the story and replace it with their version, starring you as the success they never had. Emotionally, they downloaded their fears and failures onto you like corrupted software. Financially, they projected their struggles onto your back, expecting you to carry the debts, both literal and invisible, that they refused to face. Digitally, they curated a perfect family image while the real one crumbled behind closed doors. And you, the chosen one, were less a child and more a project to erase their shame, prove their worth, and validate their survival. They weren't nurturing you. They were outsourcing their healing to you. And when you didn't fit the mold perfectly, you became the glitch in their system, the failed update they couldn't accept. Breaking free isn't just reclaiming yourself. It's rejecting their blueprint. It's telling them that trauma isn't a recipe to follow, but a warning to avoid you or the deviation. They feared the malfunction in their legacy, and that's why they feared losing you. Not because they loved you, but because losing you meant losing their last chance to rewrite a past they refused to heal. You were separated as a technique of supply chain management. It was not an accident. It was a strategic move, a cold calculation cloaked in compassion. They controlled who you saw, what you heard, which voices got through, and why. Because restricting your network means reducing your influence. Fewer viewpoints, fewer supporters, less opportunities to dispute their tale. Consider it like a supply chain in a factory. Every connection is a link, and they controlled each link to keep the product you on a tight leash, cut off from those who might give you a different view or who might challenge their narrative. They made sure you stayed dependent, confused, and alone. Every friendship subtly undermined. Every mentor discouraged. Every family member too busy or not a good influence. It wasn't about protection, it was about control. Emotional trafficking, where your feelings, thoughts, and loyalties were shipped and rationed on their schedule. Isolation became a prison without walls, a controlled environment designed to keep you compliant. There was no one around to validate your doubts, no one to say you deserve better. Instead, it was just echoes of their version of reality repeated until it became yours. And when you finally broke free, it wasn't just about reclaiming your space. It was about dismantling their entire control system. Because once you connect the dots, once you rebuild those bridges, their influence cracks, and that's when the whole operation falls apart. They didn't just isolate you. They trafficked your emotions like cargo, trading your truth for their control. And now, as you reconnect, you're not just healing. You're breaking their supply chain for good. Terrified people tell on themselves by trying to silence you. Here's the thing about terrified people, they can't keep their secrets. When you start speaking your truth, it sets off alarms they never saw coming. Instead of staying calm or letting the story settle, they panic and rush in like a fire brigade. Not to help you, but to put out the fire. Your words started when they jumped to explain your experience. What they're really doing is damage control. They're trying to rewrite your reality before it sticks like a bad editor, frantically deleting the inconvenient lines, their hurried justifications, and rushed excuses. Those are confessions in disguise. They're telling on themselves without realizing it, because the more noise they make, the more cracks show in their armor. And the Let It Go Brigade, that's the guilt trip in a shiny wrapper. It's a desperate plea wrapped in concern. Stop digging, stop questioning, stop rocking the boat. But what they really want is silence, not peace, because if you keep digging, you'll uncover more than they bargained for. The louder their cries for silence, the louder their own panic screams beneath the surface. It's the classic defense of the guilty. Make noise to drown out the truth, hoping it'll be forgotten or buried beneath the chaos. But here's the brutal truth. Terrified people telling on themselves isn't a sign of strength. It's a sign of their crumbling control. So pay attention to who freaks out when you speak, who tries to hijack your narrative. Because in their panic, they're confessing more than you ever could, and that panic is your victory in disguise. The revolution is not public, it's personal. The revolution isn't about headlines or courtroom victories. It's quieter, deeper, and more radical. The real battle for freedom takes place inside you, when you stop letting their judgments define you. Stop wearing their labels like chains and start carving out your own identity with no apologies. This revolution is private, messy, and often lonely. It's the long road of waking up to your own worth, even when everyone else tried to convince you it didn't exist. It's the day you stop asking for permission to feel, speak, and live fully, and instead claim those things as your birthright. No parade announces this moment. No crowd cheers, but inside everything shifts. The mirror no longer reflects their stories. It shows your truth. The voices in your head stop echoing their fears and start speaking your hopes. This is the real power, the kind that judges, relatives, or even time cannot take away. When you own your narrative, when you refuse to be a footnote in their saga, you become unstoppable. The court case was just a chapter. The true revolution is personal. It's the reclaiming of your soul, your voice, your life. That's the endgame. That's freedom. This story isn't just about a courtroom ruling or a broken family. It's about reclaiming what was never theirs to hold in the first place. Your identity, your voice, your freedom. Every manipulation, every twisted family, defense, every silenced truth was a brick in a cage designed to keep you small, controlled, and unseen. But the moment you decided you were more than their script, more than their victim, everything changed. They thought losing custody was their greatest defeat, but it was actually losing ownership. The last thread of control they clung to. They feared your awakening because when you wake up, the story flips. The puppet master loses their strings, and the so-called villain becomes the hero of their own life. Their panic, their desperate attempts to silence you, their weaponizing of guilt and gratitude, all exposed the cracks in their armor. Their generational trauma was never a warning. It was a blueprint they hoped you'd follow. But you refused. You broke the cycle, dismantled their supply chain of control, and stepped out of their shadow. This revolution is not public. It's internal, deeply personal. It's the quiet, relentless rise of your truth against a lifetime of distortion. It's the moment you stop needing their approval and start owning your story with fierce pride. That is liberation. That is power. That is the true victory. No court can grant or take away. So to anyone watching, understand that being the chosen one in a story like this isn't a blessing. It's a battlefield, but it's also where the greatest strength is forged. You didn't lose them. They lost you. And that loss will echo louder than any verdict ever could. Your freedom isn't just a chapter closed. It's a new book begun with you as the author, editor, and hero. Keep writing your story and breaking the silence, because the truth you speak isn't just your liberation. It's a beacon for anyone still trapped in their own cage, and that is the power that no fear, manipulation, or family label can ever steal. If this message hit home for you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Smash that like button if it stirred something deep inside, and leave a comment to tell me your truth. And hey, if you haven't joined the anointed chosen family yet, now's the ideal opportunity. Subscribe and set on alerts so you never miss a minute of real discussion and genuine healing. We're creating something strong here, and you belong. Let's rise together. God bless you.